Okay, we can start now. Yesterday I finished all the lessons and I started working on the objects challenge. So looks like a few people are submitting challenges, so I'm just gonna start by reviewing submission. This guy did it right. Prove it. Job to him. Okay, cool. That's it. Now I'm gonna continue. Yesterday I got to problem 3, so I should be starting from problem 3, JS3. Okay, let's git checkout p3. Let's make sure my branch is in sync with master, and then create test, create the necessary files. Cool. Let me just write a message really quick. So, ready to go. Write a function called solution that takes in an array of strings and return a function. Whoa. Oh, so it returns a function here. And then when I call the return function with an object, I expect it to return this new object. But what is the relationship? So Apple is not in the object. Apollo is in. Okay, so it's like it filters the object through the array. So filter object. I'm gonna call this a filter object. And the reason why I named this functions with my own name is because solutions doesn't feel very descriptive enough. I don't like writing code that way. So I'm gonna start writing my test, filter object. Instead of using the provided test, I am writing my own test just because writing tests is so important. And I could use more practice writing tests, which is why I'm writing my own instead of using what they give me. Cool. So my first test case in here should be should always return empty object if we start with empty array. And one of the things I always do is always test for empty cases. I think these are most overlooked and most important. And second test case would be should pass the given example provided. So I'm gonna, since they provided this example, I'm gonna save some time by just using their examples. And then I think it would be helpful to come up with another test case. Let's try to understand this problem a little more. So maybe should, so this example test case kind of covers a lot. So I don't think we need a third test case. I can't think of anything else other than that. So cons result function equals solution empty array. So the object. So no matter what object or how many keys I pass in, it should always give me an empty object. So that's my first test case. And my text editor is complaining a lot, so I'm gonna just add a comment to tell it to ignore these keywords. Okay, so now my text editor is not complaining. So these keywords like describe and test, like normal JavaScript doesn't have these functions, test and expect. The reason why I can use these functions is because I'm running my test using Jest, and when I run it with Jest provides me with functions like describe, test, and expect. Just like if you run your program with Node, you get functions like set timeout that you can use. So this is Jest. So now the given example that's provided, I started the array with a non-empty array like that. And then if I have an empty object, I should get an empty object. If I have this object, I should get Apollo 45. Let me close this for a second so it's easier to see. See if I have this object, it should equal Apollo 95. And then the last test case, if I have this object, it should give me an empty object. Okay. So all of my test cases passed. In the lesson doc, it tells you to come up with 3 test cases, but I feel like we have more than 3 here. Like in this group, we kind of have 1, 2, 3, 4 tests, and here we have 1, 2, 3, 4. So we have almost 8 tests here, and 2 different filter object cases. So I feel like we have more than enough test cases to continue. So I'm gonna start writing the function once filter. And this function shape takes in an array. And we return a function that takes in an argument. So now our step 2 of our problem solving is done. Step 1 was coming up with examples, which we did in our test, and step 2 is coming up with just writing down the function shape so we don't forget about it. And now step 3, we talk about how we want to solve this, right? So let's see. So we have this array, and then after when the return function is called, we need to return a new object. So we essentially have to go through every key in this object to see if the key exists in the array. And if the key exists in the array, then if the key exists in the array, then we want it to be in our result. Cool. So before I return, I think to make this faster, I need to build a map. And basically, element would be the key, and then the value would be true, false. So I'm going to build a map here. And the reason why I do that is because when you go through the object key by key, we need to find if it exists in the array. So if for each key, we go through the entire array, then we're looking at a really bad runtime, because looking through an array takes a long time. You have to go through the whole array for every key. It's going to be slow. So if I build a map of the array, then looking up to see if a key exists, it's just it's immediate. I just look to see if the indexes exist. And then after that, I'll just essentially reduce, or actually now that I'm thinking about it, I don't need to do that. I can just reduce through the array. And then for every element in the array, I check to see if it's in the object. Okay, so that is even easier. I'm gonna do that, return. So after I've decided and explained how I'm going to solve this problem, I'll just go ahead and solve it. So return array.reduce. So for and reduce takes in an object. And then this callback function takes in the accumulator and then a, let's call it key. Every element in the array is a potential key. So if the object dot has own property, if the object has the property key, then the accumulator at index key equals the object at index key. So then they share the same values. And I just return the accumulator. I think I am done. Let's run the test and see if it works. Oh, it doesn't work. It passed for one of the test cases, so that's good. Let's look at what happened here. So it expected a it to be an empty object. Is that right? In the next test, but I got Apollo. I think my test is wrong in this case. So in this case, since Apollo exists, the value should really be Apollo 45. So I must have copied from the example wrong. Okay, so it looks like my solution worked. So I'm going to add JS3, and then I'm going to commit solves problem 3 of JS3. Submit JS3, problem 3. I'm about to start challenge 4, so let me make sure I'm in sync with master. And then while waiting for this to get reviewed, the submission looks good. I'm going to start looking at the next problem, which is two-sum. So I've heard this problem, actually, this specific two-sum problem is asked in interviews a lot. So I kind of know what it does. Basically, the way it works is you go through every number in the array and you see if any two numbers adds up to 25. So 2 plus 23 is 25, so this returns true. And 2 plus 22 matches 24, so that returns true. So that's the two-sum problem. So let's create the test. And we'll start with test. So my first test case would be should return false if empty array. So that should be pretty straightforward. My second test case is should not use duplicate numbers. And let me just write the test really quick. Result equals sum2 of an empty array. Expect result false. Again, my text editor is complaining, so let me tell it to stop complaining. Okay, should not use duplicate numbers. So if I have a like 2, 3, 3, 2, 3, 3, 3. I'm having a brain fart. 4. Let's say I have 2, 3, 3, 4, and it should add up to 8. Then the result should be false because 4 plus 3 is 7, 4 plus 2 is 6. What some people do, I could see if you're not careful, you might add the same number twice and to get 8 and return true. So this is a pretty important case that I want to make sure I cover, so I write in my test. And then again, I want to make sure like 4 also return false because I don't want to accidentally use 2 twice, or I don't want to use 4 one time. So for numbers. So my third test, whenever you deal with numbers, you should always think about negative numbers and 0. So should work with negative numbers. So if I have like -3 here and 0, I expect the result to be true because 3 plus -3 is 0. Let's make sure -7 also works with -2, -4, 3. Okay, so I think I have my 3 main test cases. Let's review that. So empty array should be false. That's easy enough. Should not use 4 twice. So this should be false. And this shouldn't use 4 one time and shouldn't use 2 times. So that should be false. And then should work with negative numbers. Should work with positive numbers as well. And for this guy, I can just use the given example. Okay, so I use the example that's given. Maybe I should also use the second example. Make sure we really get down. Make sure our problem works flawlessly. Okay, so both of these cases should return true. So at this point, we have 4 test cases right now. I think we have enough examples to check our work. And now we move on to writing the function shape. Takes an array and a number, and then it returns something. Okay, so let's talk about our function. We need to the first thing we need to do is, how am I going to do it? So I need an object. And the way I'm going to approach this is, let's say my array was this. I'm gonna need an object here. So basically, when I'm looking at the number 1, right, when I'm going through the first number 1, I check to see if 23, because 23 plus 1 is 24. So I check to see if 23 is in the object, and it's not. So I do 1 true. And then I move on, and now it becomes 2 when I'm in the second element. And then 2, I look to see if the number 22 is there, and it's not. So I update the object, and then I move on. And the next one, now when I'm at 22, I look to see if the number 2 is there, and the number is there, so I return true. Yeah, and then I stop. And then if I go all the way to the end, that means I will return false. So this brings me to another interesting case that I want to add to my test. So if you're doing this during an interview, and the interviewer and you're about to solve your problem, you can always go back and write more examples. I think the interviewer would really appreciate that. Should work with 0. So the one case I'm thinking about is if you have a 0 here and the number 22, then you should return true because 22 plus 0 is true. Okay, so when I stop, I return. So that's how I'm going to solve the problem. Just to recap, when I'm at 1, so I start with an empty object. When I look at 1, I see if 23 is an object. It's not, so I do 1 true. And then now I'm at the second element, which is 2. And I look to see if the number 22 is an object, and it's not there. So I add 2 to true. And then now when I'm at 22, I look to see if 2 is an object, and it is. So I return. Okay. So to do that, I just do const result. Let I So what if I just did this return arr.find? So I need an object, const visited is an object. And then I do arr.find. Find takes in an element. And if const difference is num minus e. So when I'm at the first element, I want to see if 23 is an object. So if visited at diff, if 23 is in the object, then I return true right away. Like I found it. Otherwise, set the visited index to at an element e. So because I'm setting number 1 to true, right? So I'm setting the visited to be true. And then I return false, so it continues. So const result equals return result is equal to. So basically, if array.find doesn't find anything, it will return undefined. So basically, if array.find returns undefined, that means we didn't find our result, so we return true. If it didn't return undefined though, that means we found our result. So let's see if this works. And it failed all of our tests. Oh, because we didn't export it. It failed all of the tests again. So let's see. Wow, every single one. So if it return true for this function, that means that result is always undefined, so it should not equal to undefined. Nice, now it all passed. I was returning the opposite result. So now I'm gonna start problem 5, make sure it's in sync. Oops. With master branch, and now it is. Let's look at problem 5. Function call between objects. So given an object of key string values, okay, so this is complicated. So here's an object. Call the functions in the second object, if possible, using the values in the first object as function params. Whew. Okay, so name has Drake, and then name, this is a function. So I'm guessing I'm passing Drake into here. And then this would return name Drake Kendrick. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, so let's start the test. Let's call function call. Test should call all functions that with the right arguments. So that's the first test. So what I want to do is first make sure my text editor doesn't complain. And also I need to create mock functions. Basically, I need to make sure these functions are getting called with the right arguments and the correct number of times. So I need to create mock functions. So let's just, in here, we just create 3 mock functions. So instead of this one, on the first function, I'm gonna mock it. I'm gonna mock another one. Mock another one. So we can you can also make this like an array to make it easier. That equals just a function, just a function. So I created 3 mocked functions. So the first one would be the first function, the second one, and then I'm gonna use a key that doesn't exist in the object. So like testing. Code. So after calling the function calls, we expect function 1 dot to have been called times 1. We expect this to be called 1 time. We expect function 2 to be called 1 time. Function 3 to be called 0 times. And then we also want to make sure that function 1 is called with the right arguments. Calls the first call and the first argument to equal. So function 1, when it's being called, it should have been called with Drake, and then this one should have been called power. I don't know what that word even means. Finessing. So this one makes sure that the functions are called with the correct arguments. So we have a lot of tests here. And then we gotta make sure that in another test should return the right values from the function calls. So I'm gonna have the first test checks to make sure that my callback functions are called with the right arguments. Now I'm gonna make sure that result, no matter what happens, these functions are called, result gets the right result. So I'm gonna create a function that no matter what always returns code. So now I expect result to equal I have name power in the object, and the value is so in the first test I make sure my callback is getting called correctly, and now in the second test I make sure that my result, whatever I return from the function, would be what my result is. And then my last test could be, or maybe the first test really should be the simplest one, where should not call anything and return empty object if first argument is empty object. So again, I'm gonna have 3 functions here, but this time the first argument is going to be an empty object. And then now, since it's an empty object, none of these functions should have been called. So make sure that they are all 0. And then I'm gonna expect result equal an empty object. Okay, so I have 3 very comprehensive tests. Now I'm going to solve problem number 5. And this takes in object 1, object function. So how do I solve this problem? Now let's talk about it. Basically, I can go through the first object, and then if the key exists in the second object, I just pass it in. And then the result I put into the accumulator, and then I'm done. So this seems to be a simple one. So return object.keys of object 1, reduce accumulator, and let's call this the key. And I'm starting it with an object. Cool. So if the object function dot has own property of key, then accumulator index key equals object fun at key, and this is a function. So I execute it. Ooh, object one index key. Return the accumulator. Okay, so this seems to work, and rather than walk through it in my head myself, I'm just gonna run the test and see if it works in the test. And it seems like it worked, so I'm gonna add all the files. Solves problem 5 of JS3. Number 5. So now I'm gonna start problem 6. Make sure I'm in sync with master. And let's see what problem 6 has for me. Duplicate numbers. Write a function that takes an array of numbers and return duplicate. So, okay. 8. Cool. Let me copy these two, so I'm gonna need it. Touch JS3 6.test.js 6. Only oops. So describe takes in a key function, and then the first test is should return empty array if there are no dupes. Then I want to test to should return unique numbers if there are a lot of dupes. And then the last test would be should satisfy example. The example result 1, result 2. So expect result 2 to equal 1. Then I expect result to equal 1, 2. And then now there's a lot of my editor's complaining, so let's get rid of them. Describe text. Expect. Okay, should return unique numbers if there are a lot of duplicates. It seems like this one covers it, but let's just make sure 1, 1, 11, 1, 11, 2, 22, 1, 1. This should give me 11, 22. Should return empty array if there are no dupes. So let's get rid of all the dupes. Should return. Okay, I think all of my tests looks pretty good. So I am going to start writing my function. Only dupes takes in an array. Okay, so step 3 is explaining my solution. So here's what I'm going to do. I definitely need an object let me take notes. Object to keep count. Key is num, val is count. So I need an object, so I need to go through the array, and then every element I encounter, I increment the count in this object. And if the count is exactly 2, that means it's the first time I saw a duplicate, and I add to my result array. And then at the end, basically my result array is the accumulator, so this could just be done with a reduce. So I'm ready to code. Const count map is an object. Turn array.reduce. It's an accumulator and the element. So count equals accumulator at the index key. But if it's the first time I'm seeing the number, it's going to be undefined. So I make sure to set it to 0. So, and then accumulator at index e equals count plus 1. So I add 1 to it. So the second time I see it, so if count is equal to 1, well, if I've seen it before, essentially, let's make it more obvious by adding a comment. We see this number 4, then I'm going to, this accumulator is wrong. I meant count map. Sorry about that. Then I'm going to push the element into the accumulator. Pretty sure this would work. Let's run the test and see. Oh, why? So 2 tests passed, that's good. Why didn't this test pass? What happened here? So expected to have 1. Okay, so I gave them a 2-1 instead of 1-2. What? I think this test is wrong. It should be 2-1 because I haven't even seen 1 yet. So I'm gonna update the test. This is wrong. So instead of 1-2, it's actually 2. Now it worked. Solves problem 6 of JS3. Three, 6. Now we can check out the next problem and make sure I am in sync with master. Cool. Now while I'm waiting for the code to get reviewed, I can move on to the next one. Write a map function for objects. Okay. So I need to change the prototype to have map. That's cool. And then I need to map it with key value I, and I return the, wow. It makes sense for map to return a new object. That would make more sense, but I'm guessing this wants me to return an array of the results. This sounds more like an accumulator to me, or map. Anyways, we could work with this. Let's copy that. Fudge 7.test.js. So in here, because there's no function to run per se, I don't have to do const something equals anything. Simply requires 7. Describe map object. So the first one, functions should be called with the correct arguments. And then map should return the correct values. And then the last one is should return empty array for function should not be called if function should not be called if object is empty. Okay. And then the last one is map should return empty array if object is empty. Cool. So this 4 test cases should help me understand the test better. I think this is the hardest to write, so let's move this to the end. So map should be called with the correct values. Let's see. Let me get rid of the warnings my text editor is giving me. Okay. Map should return the correct value. So if I have a function that always returns code, then I do name or first class age then if I run object.map, pass in the function, then I expect the result to equal a string. With 3 values for code. Because this function is called with this, that, it always return code, so that should be the result. So function should not be called because we want to track how many times the function is called, we need to mock a function. So empty object.map, and I pass in function. Then we expect function to have been called times 0. I put this in parentheses. To me, I guess I should be more explicit. So object equals here. Okay, that makes it more clear for everybody reviewing my code later. So it should return an empty array const result. Expect result to equal the array. And then now we need to come back to this case. Then because I need to know what arguments the function is being called with, I need to run mock. I need to create a mock function. So I expect function.mock.calls. The first time it's called, first argument should equal the key. So this key is first. And then the first time it's called, the second argument should be Cerny. And then the third argument should equal the index, which is 0. So for the second time the function is called, the first argument should be last. The value should equal to Bender's. Then that should be 1. And then when it's being called again, this should be age 2. Okay. So after writing all the tests, I have a pretty good understanding of how this function works. So I'm going to start writing the code, and this would be object dot. So to add a new function into an object, you need to do object.prototype, and it's a map function. And this would take in how many arguments? This takes in 1 argument, which is just a function. So that's how you write a function. We don't have to export anything. Now let's talk about what to do. So what I do is I'll take this object, turn it into an array. So I get an array of keys. And then once I have an array of keys, I pretty much map through the keys, and I pass the key value and index into the callback function that gets passed in, and return the result value. So this is pretty straightforward. It's very similar to array.map. So return object.keys. So I get all the keys from the current object. And then after I get all the keys from the current object, I just map it. And map would give me the key and the index. And all I have to do is return callback, pass in the key, pass in the value, pass in the I. Spelled this wrong. And it passed. So add solves problem 7 of JS3. Code submit. 3 problem 7. Okay, now problem 8. What does problem 8 do? Oh, this needs to be delayed. Wow. Okay. So it's gonna call this function first, and then it's going to call that function, and then it's going to call that function, and it's going to call that function. And then it's done. And because this is sequential, it's sequential. So that's a tricky one. So go to branch 8. Make sure master is in sync. Make sure branch 8 is in sync with master. So global, I need to describe test, just expect. So is there a function name to this? It's called solution. So sequentially run. So sequential run, this test suite, when it runs the first test, we need to do should not. So let's look at this function. If I pass in an object, nothing happens. So solution doesn't return anything, so I don't need to care about the return value. I think for this we only need to have one test case, which is just when we run this, we need to just make sure that it gets printed out the right times. So that makes it easier. Should call functions at the correct times. So let's see what the example had. Okay. Okay, so I think if I change the value to 3 and then I just make sure, write the test case for the example, I think that should cover all of the cases for this problem. But instead of this guy, the actual function, I need to know what it's being called with. So because I need to know what it's being called with, I need to mock the function. So const fn equal jest.function. So jest.function creates a super function for me that helps me track how many times it's being called and with what arguments. So now I also need to fast forward the time. I shouldn't be doing a set timeout. Otherwise, this test would take a long time to run. So I need to Google to search just set timeout mocks. And to set a timeout mock, I need to use a fake timer. So I'm gonna use a fake timer. And then advance timer by time. So after calling this, I'm gonna advance the timer by 299. Or, to be safe, 290. So 290 hasn't hit 300 yet, so only JZ should have been called once. So we expect fn dot to have been called times to be 0. And then we advance it by 20. So now it puts us over that 300 mark. And then now it should have been called twice. And then I advanced. So this puts us at 310. So if I advance the time by 280. So then this is 310. This will be at 590. So at 590, it should still be called 2 times. And then I'm going to advance the time by 20. Then it should have been called again. And then I'm just going to do events by 70. It shouldn't have changed. And then now it gets called 4 times. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then now I'm gonna advance the timer by 2000, and it still should have been called only 4 times. Cool. And then I need to make sure that the function is being called with the right arguments. So expect function.mock.calls. The first call at index 0 should equal, let's look at the test, JC2 value. Copy this. The second time it's called, it should be equal to puck. The third time it's called, it should be equal to name3. The last time it's called, it should be equal to level. Okay. This is a really long, complex test, but just to make sure that I understand the problem correctly, when I call sequential run, before that 300 even hits, it should have been called 1 time already. And then after that 300 hits, it should be called twice. So before that 600 mark show up, it should be called, still only be called 2 times. And after that 600 mark, then it gets called 3 times. And then now, if it's called before the 900 mark, we expect it to be called 3 times. And then let's make this 50 to be safe. And after that 900 mark, it'll be called 4 times. And then if we wait a long time after that, it should only stay 4 times, because there's only 4 functions. And then we expect the first function to be called with the first key, second, third, fourth. So I think our test case is all done. Now let's write the function shape. The function shape takes in an object and a time. Okay. So what does this function do? Let's see. So now we understand the problem. We need a function to... Okay. So this is very similar to the previous problem in JS2, where there's a sequential array of functions, and we call these sequential array of functions one at a time. So to do that, I'm gonna use something called use a closure here. So cons gen function, and this closure would take in a key. Okay, actually, that was bad practice. I'm gonna stop myself. I should completely explain how I'm going to solve the problem. So first I'm gonna create an array of functions, and then I would solve like JS2 problem 6, where I just go through the array, execute one by one. So then let's assume when I'm asked this problem during an interview, what I'll do is I'll assume I have different functions. So let's assume I have a run sequential function that takes in an array of functions and a time, and then it would run it for me sequentially. So now this problem becomes super simple. Object.keys of object. So this becomes an array dot functions. So I'm going to map through the keys. And then I'm going to return a function that runs the object, the key, and then I'm gonna... So now funds is an array of functions. And then now with the array of functions, I just called run sequential of the funds and the time. Right, and then normally, since this is very if run sequential is exactly like JS2, I don't know if you remember, but if you look at JS2 problem 6, this is it takes in an array of functions and then it would just be running, right? But it's I can't require this function directly because it's a little bit different. This runs the first function after 300 milliseconds. But for our function, we need to run it after, like run it immediately. So we can't use it, but it's very similar to that. So that should give you some clues that you should be using a helper function here. So then at this point, I'll ask, if I was asked this question during an interview, I would do this and I'll look at the interviewer and I'll say, hey, do you want me to solve the run sequential function now? Be like, nah, or yeah. So let's assume he said yes. Or her. Time. So to solve run sequential, we need an array, a time, and we also need an index to keep track of where we are in the array. And whenever we have done, we're at the end of the array, then we return to stop. Otherwise, we execute the function, and then we call set timeout. And set timeout is done, we run sequential again. So I is 0. If I is equal to array.length, I return to stop. If I don't return, then I run the array at that function, and then I call set timeout. The time. And set timeout would just run sequential of I plus 1. So there's quite a few ways to solve this problem. This is what makes the most sense for me. Yeah. Before I talk too much, let's make sure it runs. Oh look, it worked. Wow. Okay. It's just to recap. I'm creating an array of functions, and I just run the functions sequentially. It's pretty much what the problem is saying, anyways. Good. Solves from a JS3. Okay, cool. So problem 9. Create a JavaScript file 9.js so that when you run it with node 9.js, the computer will output an HTML file 9.html that displays each Pokemon's name and image. There cannot be any JavaScript in the generated HTML file. Send a request to Pokemon. So if you look at this Pokemon, if I send a request there, I'll get an object back with a key called results. And then each array, and results is an array because the key is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, way down. And then within each element in the result, I have an object, and there's a key called URL. And URL is an object for sprites, and this has the front and the back. Okay. So I need to display the name and Pokemon's image. Okay, cool. Git checkout p9. Make sure I'm in sync with master. All right, let's see how I'm going to do this. So, do I need to write a test? I don't think we need to write a test for this one. It's not so much, it'll be too much work because we need to stub the fetch function and stuff like that, so just not do that. I'm going to use a module called node_fetch to send a request to here. And then for every Pokemon in this list, I need to send a request. So I need a promise.all. Okay, so 9.js. So let me just write down the modules that I need first. So need node fetch, and I also need fs. These are all covered in the lesson doc, so that's where I got them from. They cover like fs and node fetch and stuff like that. All the way down here. So okay, so I'm going to send a fetch request. Send fetch request. When we get the response, do promise.all to get all of the Pokemon. And then after promise.all resolves, I reduce to create HTML. It's pretty straightforward. So let's start app equals so I'm using an async function because I want my function to return a promise. So fetch to this URL. Pokemons equals return r.json. So after I get the Pokemon, I probably want to test. So when building apps like this, I usually do it step by step. So I do a little bit, test, do a little bit, and then test. So console log Pokemon's dot results. I expect this to be an array, so oh, did I create this in the wrong file? Yep. Folder. Gotta move this to JS3. So cannot find module node fetch, so I need to npm I save .json. Whoops, I made a mistake. I installed a package called package.json. That's not what I wanted to do. So I want to install something called node fetch because I'm using this library here. Now I can run 9.js. Cool. I look at the last character, it's an array. So each array, there's an object called, it's the Pokemon name and the URL. So const Pokemon info list equals promise.all. So Pokemons.results is an array, and I want to map it. So for each element, what I need to do is return. I want to fetch to Pokemon. Send a fetch request to get more information about this Pokemon. And then when it's done, I want to return r.sum. And then since promise.all is an array, I need to await. It's a promise, I need to await on this. And now, Pokemon info list. Let's see what I get here. Look at that. It's an array, and within the array, I have stuff like name and sprites. So now I can generate my HTML. Const HTML string equals Pokemon info list dot use, because it's an array. Accumulator element, return accumulator plus. So I want a line break between each Pokemon, and then I want the Pokemon's name to be e.name, and below the name to put an image tag, and the source is e.sprites.back default. And once I'm done with it, I write to a file, we'll call it 9.html, and put the string into that file as a function. I'm done. So let's run it. And then I see a file called 9.html. So let me go to my website to see how it looks like. So speedrun.code.com 9.html. Nice, look at that. I have all the Pokemon and pictures of their back. I made a mistake here. You should always take in argument. So I don't want to commit my package lock because it would be really hard for the interviewers to review my code. But usually when you're working in the software engineering team, you do commit this to make sure that all new packages that you put in the repository is consistent with everybody on your team. And also 9.html, this is generated by my file. So for system generated files, we also never commit it. So to be safe, I should create a file called gitignore, and I want to ignore 9.html. This way, every time I do git status, Git doesn't care about it. It's never there. Okay. So I want to add this, add changes to package.json at JS3, solves problem 9 JS3. Submit JS3 problem 9. Cool. Now this one is pending reviews. And then I'm going to build a Pokemon viewer. Let me look at send a request. Let me look at what this does. Whoa. So it's pretty much the same thing that we just built, but directly on the HTML and then I have a next, and a previous. So to do that, yeah, so let me go to problem 10. Make sure I'm merged in sync with master. Now I run 10.html. For this file, I need two buttons, previous and next. Button previous, next. And then I need a script tag. When the page loads, I'm directly sending a request to, I'm directly sending a request to here. So if you look at this Pokemon viewer, it loads right away. So I need a function called load. And load would just send a request. When it gets the response, it would display all of the Pokemon and their corresponding images. So load takes in a URL, and then it's an async function. So commands await fetch URL and so in this example, instead of just doing a return like this, instead of doing a return, a curly brackets just to return like this, there's a JavaScript shortcut where you just don't put the curly brackets, don't put the return, and that implies the same thing. So I'm gonna get the Pokemons, and then cons Pokemon list equals await promise.all, then map to the Pokemon's array, and for each Pokemon I'm going to return fetch on.url. Okay, so once I get the Pokemon list, then I need to display it. So I create a div called display. So display.inner HTML equals Pokemon list.reduce. Reduce takes an accumulator, Pokemon. Turn accumulator plus, and I need an h1 element, and in here is Pokemon.name. Then I need an image tag like just now. This one would be Pokemon.sprites.front default. Okay, and then I'm gonna add an HR to separate the elements. And then to get the next and previous working, I need to get the elements. So, display is undefined, so I need to do that. Prev equals document.query select. Okay, so now that I've changed display, I want to load with the request to here. So just the URL. And then every time after I load, I change prev.onClick function call to load Pokemons dot. So the Pokemons is coming from here, Pokemons dot next, or Pokemons dot previous. And then next dot onClick is Pokemons dot next. And then also, if no URL is passed in, like what I noticed just now is previous has a null here. So sometimes URL could be falsy. So if not URL, we just return so it doesn't give us an error. This seems to work for me. Let's just make it a little flashy and give it Pokemon browser. Okay, now let's go to the website and test it. speedrun.code.com/JS3. Okay, it's not working out. Oh, because I moved it. So move 10.html to JS3. It should be in the JS3 file folder. Pokemon browser. Oh no, there's nothing here. So then I look at the network requests. It sent one request and it got the right response. So that one's good. Why didn't it send the request for any one of this? Pokemons.map is not a function. It should be Pokemons.results. Pokemons.result. Missing equal. Oh no. What am I doing? Yeah. There we go. Now it's showing up. Click next, next, next. Oh. Oh, it's just slow. Okay. Cool. And then previous. Nice. Cool. So this works. I'm going to submit. JS3 problem 10. Cool. Now let's look at it. Everything is still pending. Cool. So while I'm waiting, I'm gonna move on to challenge 4. So yeah, rather than wait around, I can just start with the reading the docs. There is a question, could you explain async and await? So yes. Okay. So load async await, basically this, when you make it an async function, you are turning it into a promise. So let me write out the equivalent without async await. So const load equals, if you didn't use async await, so async await turns all this code into this code, and I'm gonna write out what it will turn the code into. So if not URL return, and then what it'll do is without await, you would be doing this fetch dot then, and then Pokemons equals is a function. So async await turns these 3 lines into these 4 lines. And then now you await promise.all. So what this is doing is return promise.all. And then pass in those. And then now you have Pokemon list. So dot then. You have another dot then here on list. It's a function. So now if you use async await is turning these couple of code into this chunk of code. So it's just all promises. And then everything you write in here would go inside here. And then let Pokemons. Oh. So yeah, so now if you use this code, it's the same as that code. It's just if you use async await, await is waiting for this promise to resolve, and then the then continues here. So if you look at the equivalent, fetch dot then dot then. So instead of this dot then here, we do await fetch. So I hope that answers the question. Delete this. Okay. So test-driven development we've done. Let's go through these problems really quick. Interactive elements, that's really cool. Video chat, writing your own library. CSS stuff helps me go position fixed and absolute. These are pretty cool. And then we gotta do everything using classes. That's right. Every interview problem should be solved with classes if you want to do well. And then this machine learning stuff is pretty cool. Now we are ready to solve challenges. Okay, so I can start with problem 1 because it's been reviewed and approved. So git checkout master, git merge problem 1. Okay. So problem 1 is merged in, git merge problem 2. That's merged in. So if you look at P1 and I display the files in JS3, I only have one. But then master has two, so I need to do git merge master to bring in all the files. Now I can go to JS4 and start JS4 problem1.html. So JS4 problem1 is Smartwatch Ui. Let's see. So if you look at this, the first thing I would do is the smartwatch is positioned absolute to here, to the bottom left of the screen. Okay. So, and then within this watch, there is also a div here. And then let me first get the watch down. Watch is here. Oh, nice. Beautiful watch. And then it's 600 by 800. So let's do dot watch div watch, and then I need a style. Watch position fixed. Left is 10 pixels, right and bottom is 10 pixels. And then width is 600 pixels. Height is 800. Background image. Alright, so that was pretty quick. Let's see if that did anything. Oh, nice. I have a watch showing up. Cool. So with this front end, I like to do it step by step. Here's the watch. And next up is I need a div here that is circle. And then within this div, I have two things inside: the iframe map and this thing over here. That's down here. So let's do that. Actually, I think I was wrong. They didn't have this too. Bottom is 0. And then left is also 0. Nice. So this is mine, this is theirs, this is mine, this is theirs. So now I need something to overlay this circle. I need to put something over the circle. How do I do that? So create a div inside this watch. Let's call it content. And then content is going to have position absolute. Top, let's make top 50 pixels. Left is also 50 pixels. Width is maybe 300. Height is 300. And just so I can see it, I give it a background color. And then background color would be red, green, blue. Yellow. Okay, cool. So my box is yellow. To really help position this correctly, what you can do, what I like to do, is you can right click and then you can change the top like this. I'll just move it like that until the top seems to be flush. This is perfect. 208. 208 is the best. See the left. So I'm looking at this spot, needs to be flush. So that's 131. So just 208, 131 pixels. Cool. So now this width needs to be increased a little bit. So let me do that. Seems like 379 is the width. And the height would be 378 with 379, 378. Okay, that looks good. Now to make this circular, I give it a border. Oops. I think I give it a border radius of 50%. There you go, perfect circle. So now that I have this perfect circle, what do I put inside? This thing is supposed to slide in and slide out, but they have a bug with Mozilla Firefox, so it doesn't work. But I'll figure that one out later. First, I need the top half to be this iframe. How do I get that? Go to Google Map, share embed. Let's go here. And then my perfect place is Siberia. Or actually, National University of Seoul, or Seoul National University. This is where my friend went to school. Share, embed a map, copy HTML. Is that all I have to do? Let's see. What? So this is sticking out like a sore thumb. To prevent things from sticking out of that beautiful circle I created, I think what I need to do is give it an overflow none. Let's see if that works. Doesn't work. Doesn't work. Overflow hidden. Oh. So nice. But I don't want this this block thing. Is there a way to remove that? Small. This one has it. How do I remove this? Custom size. I don't see how it's possible to remove as I click on here. Seems like this is the only way to do it. Okay, we don't have a choice. We're stuck with it. Or maybe there's something. How did this person do it? They don't have one. Let's look at their page source. They just stopped at 643. Does that mean anything? So this does PayPal, blah blah blah. Sell that. Oh. Don't know. Don't think there's anything we can do here. Unless, I'm gonna give it one more minute. Because we still have time. So inside this iframe, there is an element called, yeah, there's no way I can select this. There's no ID or, oh, there's a place card. So what if I did within iframe place card display none. That one didn't work. So I have given up. So now, don't know how to remove this. I hope it's okay for the reviewer. But I do want this map to be up here, because when you look here, this should be centered, right? So mine is not centered. So I need it to be up here somewhere. So then my iframe is to have position up 10 pixels. Just keep moving this up. So top is -135. Left is -150. Top is -105. So I can make that disappear like this. Yeah. So top is -145. So iframe has position absolute. Top is -145 pixels. Left is -105 pixels. Cool. This worked out fine. Now I need another element here that covers the bottom half of the page. So we need a dot time. So time would show time 7 6 HR and class time. Hour minute. And then time, I'm gonna give it a position absolute. Top is going to be 50%. And then Z index is 1 because I want it on top of the iframe. Cool. don't know why it's so small, but height 100%. Background needs to be white. Width percent. Align center. Cool. So that worked out. I need height 100%, width 100%. So height 100%. And background color. Text. Line. Center. Okay, so this doesn't look very pretty. What does the challenge say? Font size for time is 5 EM with margin top of 30 pixels. So margin top H1 has font size 30 EM. What is that? Doesn't work. Let's observe how they did it. Font size is 5 EM. Gosh. What happened to the app? Okay, cool. So this works. And then now when I click on it, it needs to move up. So I need to add an event listener. So now I get to write some JavaScript. Content equals document.query selector. Is it called content? It's called time. Time content dot unclick. Click on it. Give time content class list dot has selected. I don't know if class list dot has is a thing, so I'm gonna look it up. Dot contains. And then now I need to give it a selected. When it's time and it's selected, the top is going to be 0. So now I click on it. Yeah. So this moves, but it doesn't move slowly. So to make it move slowly, it needs to do WebKit transition CSS transitions. So transition duration, it's that one. How do I use that? transition. So we want our time, not the selected, because once you click on it and it gets removed, it doesn't transition anymore. So we want transition to top. Be 1 second. Okay, nice. So the time I want cursor be pointer. Okay. So this one doesn't work, but I want to know what is in here, so I kind of have to move this up a little bit. So it needs to say Monday, June 22nd. So Monday, June 22nd. So H2, Monday, June 22nd, 2020. Nice, I almost got it. Now all of these needs to be dynamic, right? So our min class day, and then class date. So I need to get this element out. Day, date. So I have day, date, and hour min. So let's see how to get the hour. So a equals new date. This is to get a new date object. A dot get day. Is that get day? Today is a Monday, so that gives you Monday is a 1. Okay. Const date equals new date. Const day equals days at index date. Get day. Oh, days are too hard to copy and paste by myself. Okay. I got some sample code. Let's see what the sample code gives me. D equals new date. That's cool. These are the sample code here. This is to get day. Cool. Const day equals that. So day dot inner text equal. So we got the day down. Let's delete everything else. Let's check to make sure the day down. Nice, we got the Monday down. So let's say this was empty. Sunday, for example. Click on it, the day got changed to Monday. Yes. Day worked. So now month is that. And then date dot inner text equals June dot get does get date give you? Oh, let's get date. Get date gives you the 22nd and then comma and then a dot get year. Whoa, full year. So date also works. Let's make sure. Okay, get full year also works. Now the last part is hour min. So ons hour equals e dot get hours is 17. So that if hour is smaller than 10, then hour equals 0 hour. So add a 0 to it. And then now we need to get the minutes. Get the minutes. Same thing. That minutes equals d dot get. If minutes is smaller than 10, minutes equals 0. And then the variable is hour min. So hour min in there. Text equals hour colon minutes. And to make sure it works, I'm going to change that to loading. Awesome, 1921. So everything works here. I'm going to git add JS4 solves problem 1 of JS4. First problem. Okay, and now let's make sure it's submitted. Cool. Looks like all of my code is submitted. Wow. Thank you everybody who reviewed. Now I'm going to merge all of the solutions in. So git checkout master, git merge. So if I look at JS3 folder, I've already merged the problem 1 and problem 2. So I'm going to merge problem 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And starting tomorrow, I would start doing problem 2 of JS4. Thank you for watching. We went a little bit over because I was stuck on the first problem. And yeah, tomorrow we would start from challenge 2. See you guys tomorrow.